Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 188 with Daniela Rivera. I had a great chat with Daniela, and we talked about so many things, including her journey, starting with a Korg Triton keyboard and assisting for legendary mixer Phil Tan. We talk about coming up the traditional studio route, the Atlanta music scene, working the Soundbetter platform, her approach to low end, getting great pop vocals, stereo bus enhancement techniques and her approach to mixing in general, restoring bad vocal recordings, noise reduction. She talks about how you should just do it and don't be afraid to show off. We also talk about being elected as governor of the Recording Academy's Atlanta chapter and so much more and everything in between. I really love this chat. I think you will too. So here's my chat with Daniela Rivera coming up right here on Secret Sonics. Hey everyone, if you're a music studio professional who wants to build deeper relationships with better clients, former guest of the show, Carl Bonner, has created some free educational resources for you. The link is in the show notes below, so go check it out. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Daniela Rivera. Daniela is a daytime Emmy and internationally nominated mixing engineer. She is a multiple Grammy participant for records such as Rihanna's Unapologetic and multi-platinum audio engineer with credits on Billboard charting hits. Daniela has been an educator in music technology since 2015, served as a Grammy U mentor, and is a new committee member for AES, and is a re-elected governor for the Recording Academy Atlanta chapter from 2023 to 2025. So yeah, Daniela and I connected online recently, and I invited her to join me on the air, which she has graciously agreed to do. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Daniela.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your backstory, how you got into this, your origin story, if you will. Don't have to go too deep into it. It could be TLDR or whatever you feel comfortable with sharing. But tell me how you got into audio and how you started mixing records and doing all the things that you're doing today.
Sure. You know, it all started actually just playing piano as a kid. Just like it was a hobby of mine. I didn't think that it was going to be anything career-based at all. And the keyboard that's actually behind me, the Korg Triton Studio, is really the hero of my origin story. And when I got it, I just thought, okay, now I can start making compositions and adding in drums, because before I was just writing, obviously, only on acoustic piano. So it was just piano. So I was just excited about like getting to bring in strings and now some drums. And I got it home and I was like, there's no sound. How do we get sound out of this keyboard? And it was the first time I purchased a professional piece of gear. And I was like, oh, you have to buy a separate amp for this? So we went back to the store, right? Because, you know, like the little house keyboards had the speakers built in on it. Right. Went back to the store, got the amp. But actually, before I got the amp, I tied into my surround system. So like I was already engineering and troubleshooting and finding a way to get audio out to play this thing.
Wow.
But then I struggled with, okay, now I've wrote this song. How do I make this sound good? Like everything was up the middle. I didn't know about panning, you know, but I got on some blogs. I found out, oh, okay, you've got to pan things to the left and pan things to the right. So I think my story started off really just trying to be actually a producer, like most people, and trying to make their music sound good. And at that time, you know, this was 2006, you know, YouTube wasn't just like the industry of like having access to tutorials was not the same. I did actually order a tutorial. VHS actually came with the Korg Triton. I had to order it. Yeah, I was like, I don't know how to operate this thing. So we got the Korg VHS and I learned a couple of things about what reverb was, you know, and how to quantize, because I didn't even know that that was a thing. I would just replay everything if my timing was off. Eventually, I was on some forums and I found other producers and their struggles with it. And then advertisements did start to pop up and I saw there was a school Full Sail. And I was like, oh, wow, there's like a whole job. You can get a whole degree on, you know, audio engineering. And that's kind of what started the search. And I actually did not go to Full Sail for engineering. I kept searching and I found SAE. And I found SAE was in Atlanta. And location was a big thing too. So I kind of just kept it in the back of my mind of like, okay, there's schools to go to and I could like develop this into a career. I saved up some money later on. I ended up going to SAE, but it really branched, you know, from that keyboard and wanting to produce music and not knowing how to make it sound good.
Yeah. I was gonna ask what music you were listening to at the time that kind of inspired you to kind of like find all those sounds. Like what was like scratching your itch?
Oh man,
what was causing the itch that needed to be scratched, so to speak?
Yeah, this is actually a good question because it's a whole full circle moment. The stuff that I was listening to really was Manny Fresh. I was a huge fan of Manny Fresh and Cash Money. Like I just loved his productions because he just was different on the way he produced hip hop. So that's how it kind of started. I actually wanted to be like hip hop. I was trying to be a total like the female Manny Fresh. But then some really dope songs started coming out from producers called Stargate. I didn't know, who Stargate was at the time and who they were working with, but I just knew every time there was a song and I would go look it up, I'd find out, oh, Stargate produced that. Stargate produced that. And I was like, man, their stuff sounds so good. So I was really heavy into listening to their productions at the time as well, which later on, you'll see the bulk of, my credits and workings are with Stargate and with Phil, who was also mixing it. So before, like the stuff I was into and drawn to and listening to were all the people like I ended up working with later on.
Wow, that's so crazy.
Except Manny. I never got to work with Manny Fresh, which actually kicked off the inspiration. But
there's still time, maybe.
Yeah, that will always.
All right. Wait, so keep going. Bring us up to date. What happens next? So you go to SAE.
I do. I go to SAE, and my intentions were to be a producer. And I got in there, and it was the first time I ever saw a studio and a console and outboard gear. And I just fell in love, like just from the looks of it. And then once I enrolled in classes and started to learn about engineering, I was like, oh, I'm hooked, just signal flow. I just fell in love with it. And I connected with it really well. I still wanted to go into production, but, the degree was in audio engineering, and I did love audio engineering. So I finished the school and I interned, took the traditional route, and I went to a studio called Silent Sound Studios, which is here in Atlanta, Georgia. It's been renamed since, but at the time it was Silent Sound Studios. And, I was told it was the best studio and, like, you're not going to get a job. You're going there for a recommendation. Like, but, it's kind of like a boot camp. And if you can make it through, then you're going to have a good recommendation on the end and then a possible job opportunity somewhere else. So I went, full in there. There's a whole story with Silent Sound Studio. So I get in there and, you've got Tony Braxton on the wall. You've got TLC. You've got like everything from the 90s that I grew up on, like on the wall was recorded there. Tom TK Kidd was the studio owner at the time. And he was Daryl Simmons' engineer. Daryl Simmons was a silent partner with Babyface. And, Babyface and L.A. Reid had LaFace Records. So all of that stuff from the LaFace days came from that studio. Yeah. And which was everything I grew up on, even before I knew I wanted to be in music,
I think most millennials grew up on it. I'm just kidding. Or maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe the younger ones. Are we the older ones? I don't know.
Older ones.
There's millennials is a wide range. Right. So, so I was just, just that magic. You're like, wow, this is it. This is the big, like, dream. It was a very analog bass. I had an SSL 4000G. It was like pristine. It was just, top tier engineer and respect for the craft. And, there, they didn't really want you to be a producer. Like, you weren't coming in there to make beats. And even though I had fallen in love with engineering and wanted to do engineering, I was still in the intern office, like making beats in Logic after all my stuff was done. But I finished that internship and I was asked to stay on to kind of be like a general assistant. I did get another offer, but I decided to stay with the general assistantship because I just wasn't ready to leave Silent Sound. I felt like there was still something I could learn there. And I still wanted access to the SSL because I was like, I may not go to another studio that has this setup anymore. They still had working Studer A800s. So it was just, again, like I was like, I don't know when I'll be in a studio like this again. So I stuck around, and 3 months later, they had 2 engineers on staff, or not on staff, but that were the assistant engineers, and one left. And, in this industry, that's how you move up, is somebody leaves. And I was the kind of longest standing intern at that point. Well, I was a general assistant. And so I got the position. So this studio that I was told, you're only going there for a recommendation, you're not for a job, I ended up getting a job from. So that was 9 months after graduation. I got my first paycheck, as an assistant engineer. Amazing.
Just keep going. So how did you, like, I know you have a history with Phil Tan. So like, how did that happen? How did you meet him? I guess close the gap of that story.
Absolutely. So I continued to work at Silent Sound as assistant engineer on like recording production sessions. And I got a call from the studio owner to see if I was interested in applying for an assistantship with Phil Tan, that he was looking. So Phil had gotten not his last two, but 2 out of his last 3 assistants from Silent Sound Studios. So again, the reputation of the studio and also the reputation of the owner, it was so strong that like, that's who you call, that we've already been vetted, and kind of like screened. And so if your name was put forward, in fact, my interview was, you come highly recommended from Tom TK Kid. And he gave me a handshake and he walked away. And I was like, okay, I then interviewed with his assistant. But it was through the studio. And it was a little bit like bittersweet because I wasn't ready. I still wanted to stay there. There were still things I wanted to learn at Silent Sound, but also like you don't turn down a job, with Phil Tan. And I just didn't know if I was ready to move into mixing is what it kind of was, because I wasn't like at that level yet. I was still on production, creation, recording, in that sense of engineering. But I took the job and I'm so glad I did. And then I ended up working with him for a little over 4 years.
Wow. And so what did you do for him? You were assistant engineering, assistant mixing.
Assistant mixing and studio engineer. So Phil had his own studio. It was a 2-room studio. And then he also subleased out to some like video editors and stuff like that. And so not like studio management, but obviously facilities. So that's his studio. It's his operation. We had a shop room, all of our files, our servers, our systems. So I'm a studio engineer for the studio, but then I'm also his mixing assistant. So helping set up with sessions, close out, printing, files, and all the correspondence between label and managers and our producers, so I'm front end and back end, and then keeping his operation up and running. He wants to walk in and mix and walk out,
Yeah, maybe just give the audience a couple ideas of some of those records that you worked on with Phil, so they have an idea of what we're talking about.
Okay, sure. So one of them, like the first one, is actually Justin Bieber's Mistletoe. That was my very first credit with Phil Tan. And from there, it was like Rihanna's Talk That Talk, Leona Lewis, Mariah Carey, Wiz Khalifa, eventually Coldplay. That kind of ends out our time together. So I've got some beginnings and endings. There's also a Michael Jackson record that went on. Whitney Houston, both of those were post-mortem. Selena Gomez, Demi Lovato. Yeah.
Basically, the list goes on. I remember when Rihanna started like blowing up. I guess it was when I was in college. It was just like hit after hit after hit. It just felt like every single hit was hers for like, I don't know, maybe it's like 2007, 2008 or something around that time. Yeah, amazing. I want to ask you, I guess I want to ask you one question about Phil and then also about your kind of the whole story that you kind of talked to me about. So I guess let's ask about Phil first because we're already on Phil. Was there like a lesson that you learned from him that like really sticks with you today? Like what would be like that one lesson that you've kind of internalized from that experience?
There's not just one. You can't. I can't put it into one. The thing about Phil is like I'm still learning stuff from that time period of 4 years, as I grow and progress. So I think it's just like to be observant, to think and to listen in all scenarios and surroundings, because it's not just like that one tip, it's the whole collective. But that also goes into mixing too, because he's very much of like, listen to the record. It will tell you what needs to happen, So right. I think just that mentality of listening, I think is probably what I learned the most from him. Because like I said, there's still things that I'm like, now I get it. There's just still lessons that I'm learning from that time period.
No, that's a great lesson. When so many people don't listen, they just press play and then they're thinking and, also looking, right? There's a lot of looking on the computer screen and stuff like that. And a lot of distraction and a lot of like, hey, actually, what's going on here? And if you actually pay attention, you can figure it out. That's awesome. Also, I wanted to ask you about, I guess, you coming up the ranks, like very much the traditional way, in a big studio, assisting and getting like your first job in a big studio and that whole thing. Is that something that you'd recommend for somebody getting started today? Is that like, obviously it worked out for you. Not everybody's doing that kind of career route. So I'm curious like how that was for you and if you'd recommend it, to people today or maybe you wouldn't recommend it. Like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it depends on what the objective is. What is the career objective? I wanted a path. I wanted to be like trained by the best of the best at the best studios. And that's what that path gave me. It is a lot maybe slower sometimes, like the time commitment to put in. And we are in a different just day and age of the music industry. I mean, even when I graduated, it was a weird change within the music industry too. But nowadays with like, again, home studios and independent, like making good money, you don't have to go the major route or traditional route. But if you're like, I, want to be at the highest echelon and want to learn from the people that have been doing this for 30, 40 years, then yes, I would recommend going in that path if that's what your intended outcome is. If you're like, man, I just want to make some good music and put good vibes out, then you probably can get, the training through like schools that we have today. We've got so many amazing tutorials. Like half the people are giving the secrets out online. Like, we've got Secret Sonics here, right? There's so many audio academies.
Get everybody to spill the beans. That's what this is about.
Yeah. So you can totally do it without it and put the time in. I mean, we see, every year somebody break out from home, from a home base setup
right
on their own. So it really depends on the individual and what their outcome is, their intended outcome is to be.
Yeah. I'm also not sure that there's as many big studios now that are doing that as there were maybe back when you started. Although I think I'm like doing some like very rough math about when you started, and I assume it was like just as kind of studios were beginning to close, right? The big studios were beginning to close.
Right. So 2010, it would have been April 2010, 1 month after graduation, I went straight to Silent Sound. 2011-ish, end of 2010, beginning of 2011, like things were slow. And I remember I was like, hey, because project studios were now the thing, the budgets were starting to decrease, and like Silent was a 1-room facility. So it was expensive. And it's not like we had all these smaller multiple rooms. It's been adjusted now. It's like a modernized and has smaller rooms there. But back then it was about privacy and silence. And like that was the thing about that studio. You booked it, you're the only one there. But again, so that was what was happening. Studios were closing. We lost Southern Tracks, which was a big studio that had closed. I think Zaxxon sold. We had like rental companies that were closing, and it got scary. I remember like feeling it. I was like, oh man, I just got in this industry and now all these studios are closing. What's going on?
Yeah.
I got side work. Like I asked, my boss, I was like, is it okay if I work at a project studio on the side? Because we didn't have any gigs coming in. So I was allowed to do that just for, sake of trying to get some income. But it wasn't the same. It was so not the same. I was like, I don't want to be here. I want to be like at the real studio, the real deal.
The Holy Grail.
Yeah.
I think we got started in audio engineering roughly around the same time. And like, I wanted to so badly wanted to go to a big studio and learn and like be in that environment. And I mean, I was in Israel, so it was a slightly different story. But everyone I called was like, no, it's just me. Like, I don't have any need for anybody else. It was just like, I guess I have to do this on my own. And that's kind of how I went in that direction. Like, I didn't think there was anything, it didn't seem like there was anything available. So yeah, kudos to making it work.
And later on, I still worked at Stankonia Studios too after Phil. So I still did close to 2 years there at another big facility. So, and they're still around, and we still have Tree Sound, and Doppler's has changed hands. I don't know if that would count. And Patchwork is still here. So we have a couple, and then we've still got producer studios that are here.
Atlanta's also a bit of a hub, right? I feel like it's like the hip hop R&B hub of America, maybe. Is that right or wrong?
No,
I don't know.
You're right. You're 1,000% right. But
like, it's like there's LA and Nashville for like, pop, country, and I don't know, all rock, I guess. New York is like no longer a hub, it seems.
I've been hearing. Right. Yeah, I just been getting people telling me that they're like, nothing's really happening in New York. The music scene, everybody left. This is the thing, like Atlanta, obviously the 90s, that whole era was huge R&B, but then also hip hop surged from there as well too. Because like I said, like Outkast, and they're still got, Stankonia Studios here. Producers became a big thing also here. And then hip hop has continued on, like our influence and the urban culture is all like stemming out of Atlanta. But Atlanta has so much more going on too. We have rock that happens here. We have pop that happens here too. And it's kind of in a little bit of a resurgence because the community's like, hey, we've got other good music and artists coming out of here. But hip hop seems to always take the forefront. So we are trying to look at supporting and kind of rebranding to say like, there's more than just hip hop here.
Awesome. Yeah, I know Atlanta's also like a crazy growing city in like an era where cities are shrinking, from what I understand.
Correct. You are correct. Please stop coming here. We do not have the roads. And
you should come see Israel. It's the road, the infrastructure here is housing. We just don't have houses here. It's crazy.
Well, they're building like any open lot, they're building apartments. And that's how you know, like, people are still moving. You know, our cost of living was really low for a city like this compared. So people coming from LA, Nashville, New York, which we've had a lot of that during the pandemic. There was a lot of moves, you know, within the industry.
Yes. Yeah. I guess we'll see how it pans out, right?
Yeah.
So let's bring ourselves forward to today. Today you're mostly mixing. Talk to me about how artists find you, or how you find artists to work with. Like, how do you get, like, you know, music through the door to get mixing?
Yeah. So Soundbetter has been my foundation for mixing and how I kind of took off for freelance. I was working locally. Like I said, I was working at Stankonia Studios and doing stuff like that. And so I was freelancing as an engineer. But as far as like mixing, I started working online, like remote bookings started to become a thing at that time, like 2016, 17. And I worked the platform basically. Obviously, we had verified credits, but if you go on there, everybody's got verified credits. I mean, there's multiple like Grammy winning and nominated engineers on there. So it really was just taking the jobs that resonated with me, which tend to be pop because that's what all my credits are in. And that's actually what my preferred style is. And just taking it one mix at a time. You know, one mix grew into two. Those beginning years, I got some really amazing producers. And to be honest, like, the most important relationship typically is the relationship with the producer, more so than the artist. You know, one producer can give me 10 clients. Not that I don't have good relationships with my artists, but that's like how I kind of started was I was getting, you know, producers that were booking me. And so they were bringing multiple artists back, which if you even look at Phil's story, you know, like he was with Jermaine first and then it was the Stargate. It's the same thing. Like, you know, if you get a good team that you can link up with. So the beginning parts were that, linking up with good producers that I was like, man, they're dope. Like, I love what they're doing. I want to be a part of this. And now, like, you know, years later, you see either me and them have been successful together or they've been still successful or their artists have been successful. So I was really working just the remote booking. That's how I got in on mixing.
Wow. So I'm super curious because I've never heard anybody say that they got their start through Soundbetter. And I have to admit that I'm like a little bit skeptical of platforms because the thing about I've had a couple interactions on Soundbetter, and basically the one that I'm remembering is I hired a pedal steel guitarist on Soundbetter to work on a record I made, and the guy did a great job. Like, it was awesome. But then, like, I have no idea who this person is, how to be in touch with him. And, like, so much of, for me, like you're talking about, like, the teams, the producers, your relationships with people, like, so much of that is, like, that's, like, everything, right? It's, like, who am I working with? Like, you know, I'm, like, good friends with my mastering engineer. Like, I'm in touch with all these people. And, like, on Soundbetter, it's, like, you have to contact them through the platform. Like, that seems, like, difficult. How did you work your way around that? Or, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I would say, like, I got my start on Soundbetter. Like,
okay.
I guess if you're saying for mixing, you're right. Yes, that's where
you're able to get your kind of, I'm curious, because I don't know many people that were able to kind of, like, you know, use the platform to their advantage. But I know people are on it, and also I saw your profile there, and also some other people I know have had a lot of success on it. But yeah, I'm just curious.
I know what you mean. It could be, I don't know. I think with everything that was kind of going remote, people are used to buying online. You know, like, people are used to communicating online. I can tell when I have older clients because they're like, can I get an email? Here's my number. You know, like, newer people, they're fine not to, like, I don't need your email or phone number. We'll just send this. But I do have some clients, they don't like that way of communicating out of respect to the platform. You know, I always stayed within the platform unless it was like an issue specifically with the client that was like, hey, can we do email instead? Or can we talk on WhatsApp? WhatsApp actually became my way of communicating to a lot of people because I was working also internationally. And so it just was a way better way to communicate with people that are 12 hours, you know, time difference from you.
That's my world. The WhatsApp world. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So you're able to communicate and get it all done over Soundbetter, and, like, the platform just basically didn't get in your way, is what you're saying?
No. I mean, it aided me because it also gives security to the client and to me and to the service provider, because it's like, hey, you're going through them. If we mess up, you can contact them, versus, like, if we do this all offline and I just, you know, invoice you or send me some cash, whatever, what way, there's no checks and balance, like, overseeing this booking.
Right.
So in some sense, I think people found security that, well, one, there's reviews. Two, I can cancel and get a refund, you know? So
Yeah. No, that's great. It's super interesting because I've just like, I wasn't able to kind of figure it out. And like, because it's like, these are the people I know, so I keep working with them or they work with me and et cetera, et cetera. So it's like so interesting to hear like a different experience on a platform. And that's a really interesting benefit also of a platform is like, that like, yeah, they're verified, they have reviews. I know like if I'm unsatisfied, the platform will refund me and that you're going to get paid for your work, et cetera. It makes a lot of sense.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the owners, I mean, I've had a couple correspondences with them throughout the year. I mean, they really care about, their Soundbetter platform. And I feel like they're equally try to support the client and the provider. So they do a good job and they're always continuously updating it and adding new things. I just saw that now they've added video chat. So they listen to us as well. They'll ask us to like, hey, if we had to put money into these features, what are the top features that you would want? Because one time we were asking about an app and they were like, you know what? Everybody would rather have money go to marketing and advertisement than put money to an app. So we're going for marketing and advertisement, which makes sense because that's the people coming in. You're bringing us the traffic, which is then more clients. So it's also ran very well on that platform. They listen and make changes as needed.
Mm. They were acquired by Spotify, right?
Okay, so they were, and they kind of like even created playlists for Spotify, and that had like links directly to my account. So like if you found my Spotify playlist and it had any of those like big credits or even of my mixing credits, you would see Daniela Rivera, you could click on it and it would go straight to my Soundbetter page. Then you could book me. And it was it was super, super cool. Last that I had researched is that Spotify has sold it back. So
oh yeah, I think I saw that.
Yeah. So we never really saw much after that. But I thought that the idea of having the link directly to then book that person.
Credits are terrible, right? And that's a great way to kind of, that is, in theory, it's a genius idea because it's like, oh, who worked on this? You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
We don't have the CD, whatever, booklets anymore, right? It's like, how do you find credits? So it's such a problem.
It really is.
Hey everyone, if you've made it this far into the episode, then you're probably a fan of podcasts that help your personal development in the music industry. Former guest of the show and fellow podcaster Travis Ferentz hosts Progressions, a show about finding success in the music business. If you dig Secret Sonics, I have a feeling that you might enjoy his angle too. You can go check it out via the link in the show notes below. So go check it out. All right, back to the episode. Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about your workflow. I listened to a bunch of your mixes. They sound great. I really love the low end on your mixes. I'd love to hear a little bit about your approach to kind of getting that big, I don't know, I guess with like R&B maybe inspired pop low end. What's any tricks, tips, things that you generally do, thought processes? I'd love to hear about it.
I'm like shocked because I've had compliments on my low end, but like most people are like, man, it's so clean, to me, I don't feel like I have enough low end. So it's an interesting comment from you. So thank you, one, for saying that. I'm more about cleaning up probably the low end, but it's still there. So I guess it's almost like the illusion of that it's more powerful than what it is, if that makes any sense. And for me, like doing a low pass filter is so beneficial on bass, and finding a good like resonating frequency for those high harmonics to come through is, I think, where I find the sweet spot of getting it to sit like in the mix. And then also doing some type of notch on the low mids to allow where the kick is going to come through. I love like notching out, not everything, but when it comes to kick and bass, I will notch for sure. And I kind of like the kick to be a little bit in front of the bass for me personally, which is not always the thing. I think that's more of a pop thing than it actually is an R&B thing. I think R&B is a little bit more bass heavy, and then the kick is supporting it. Right. So those are kind of my takes on it. And then also doing a high pass filter and finding that right cutoff frequency that it clears out the rumble, but then again accentuates that fundamental note. Yeah. So it's, again, allowing the bass to tell me where it feels best at, where it complements best at on the low, and then can like poke through on the top as well.
Yeah. Are you big into like sidechaining the bass to the kick, or not so much? Sounds like more like old school kind of like rock and roll approach, Not
so much. I maybe 5-10%, I don't know, max 10% might do sidechaining for kick and bass. That just is only like if like, okay, this thing is not getting out of the way. I don't know what's happening. Like we've got a sidechain, then I will. I do a lot of parallel compression with my kick though. So I still use that all the time. But the sidechaining is like only if it's required and I can't get it to work by complementing EQs with between the kick and the bass.
Awesome. And the other thing I noticed was the vocal tone in your mixes were awesome. Just like nice upfront plop vocals, like super. Yeah. What's your approach to vocals? Thoughts on vocals? Anything you want to share?
Awesome. Thank you. I definitely will say like, I appreciate that compliment because vocals are one of those that I do get a compliment on. And I will say that if I took inspiration and from Phil, it was the vocals. Like he is king of vocals. And so for me, vocals take precedence, that's the most important part of it. Like, if the vocals aren't there, then who cares how great the bass and the kick sounds? I mean, it could still get away. We hear mixes all the time where stuff gets away. But for me on vocals, I do a lot of editing. And I'm probably a better editor than I am a mixer. And so I spend a lot of time doing cleanup, breaths, de-breathing, a lot of fades and stuff like that. It's a lot of small things that can make a very impactful difference in the performance of the vocal because it affects even how it hits the compressor. And so the compressor is not this like clamp, but if you faded and done some editing, the compressor's smooth with it as well. And it's all these very, very small things that I do that give a better polished, like, just vocal performance. Also automation. I still, do automating. That was another one of those things that Phil would do. He would spend a lot of time automating, especially after you've gotten all your levels right and everything like that. It's like, okay, now the vocals sound perfect. And there might just be small parts, like at the very beginning of the word, like, okay, you need that to come up just so it's still sitting on top. So again, collectively, it's all these little things that are being done that make
the massaging of the vocal.
Correct. And I'm a big into step compression as well too. So that's kind of my thought process on it. Compression level. I don't rarely compress on the track level, but like I have a lead vocal bus that will have compression on it, and then an all vocal bus that has compression on it, and they're all doing different types of compression. But it's just step compression, building the loudness up in stages. And building like the fatness around the vocal up in stages.
Yeah.
And I like semi-parametric EQs because then like my options sometimes are limited or like that have set frequencies. So I'm not like sweeping through. Like I shouldn't have unlimited possibilities. Let me just click these 3 settings, yes or no, Did it make the vocal better? Did it not?
Kind of like an SSL or like an API kind of EQ.
Right.
Kind of thing.
An API would be like a good example or something like that. So sometimes less is more, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Sometimes like I use like the Moog EQ and I'm like, okay, there's only a couple there's only a few different like frequencies here, but like it does what you want it to do rather than like pulling out the Pro Q3 and like maybe you're pulling out 500, but actually like somehow the 650 hertz on the Moog sounds better. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know.
It's true. And then
that's just an amazing EQ, but
it is. It's fantastic. It sounds great. There's some gear. I mean, they do what they do well, and we all know it. And that's why their names are so popular because what they do is extremely well. De-essing is another big thing too. Like there's multiple stages of de-essing that happen. Like the 902, that's another like piece of gear and or plugin that like, man, it just does de-essing well. Like,
have you tried the RX de-esser?
I have not tried the RX de-esser. I did see that jump by Isotope.
Yeah, it's so good. It's like random. I just like, I started using it. I'm like, this is really good.
I'll be excited to try that.
That's my hot tip for de-essing. That's kind of what I'm checking out these days. Amazing. So it sounds like you're doing like parallel stem processing, the usual kind of like, maybe you have a stereo bus compressor. What is like, I guess the routing look like in your mixing?
Well, and then also, obviously it depends too, because like not every session, as you would know, is equal. What I talking about the majority of what I do in mixing, but sometimes like files come in and they're not adequate enough for them to even start in my template, if that makes sense. Like, cause it wasn't processed by somebody else. It didn't have a good engineer or a good producer on it. It's like, oh, this is like close to being raw. Some of the things that I've been doing actually beforehand has been revamping the vocals just to get them to like a decent starting place. But let's say if I get stems that come in very well, and they can go straight into the template, then a lot of times it's like a high pass filter if it's needed on the vocals, if it wasn't already done. And then it's going like leads go to my lead vocal bus. I have a background vocal bus. I have a hook vocal bus. Again, just depending on how many different groups are happening. I don't want to overcrowd any of my groups with too many things that are happening, because then the compressor's just working way too much. So
Right. Yeah.
I just group obviously like backgrounds. If these backgrounds are all singing the same thing at the same time, then I'll level them individually on the track, but then they're all going to, a background vocal group.
Right. With some compression or whatever.
Right. With some compression. Try not to EQ too heavily on there, like to shape the whole group, but sometimes it needs it, to sit in the mix. And then I do have an all vocal bus, which I do have multi-band compression happening on there. It's the C4, which is definitely a big part of then the polished sound of all the vocals, and how they sit in the mix.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people use C4s, but I've seen some people using C4s on individual tracks, or then their lead vocal bus. But this one's going into an all vocal bus. So it is being I guess we call it food groups processing.
Yeah. But it must be subtle if you're using multiband on an entire vocal bus, right?
I mean, it's doing some multiband compression. It's doing some multiband compression, but I think it's really more about controlling those mid highs and highs a lot of times. And then sometimes, cleaning up the vocals, I might lose a little bit of bottom. A lot of times I don't have to adjust it, but sometimes I'm like, ooh, that got thinned out a little bit. Then it might add a little bit of warmth back in on the vocals. But a lot of times it's really there to control some of those high mids and highs that just collectively add up with vocals.
Yeah.
And then my instruments are routed into light groups. Guitars might have a guitar bus. Sometimes there's nothing even on the guitar bus. It's just final volume. You know what I'm saying? And then synths or keys go to a synths and keys bus. And I route my kick and snare and my bass, to my stereo bus separately. So it's not going through any group processing because I kind of want it to breathe as much as possible.
Yeah.
So some of the other stuff is being contained a little bit more, and that's allowing to come through.
Right. You want that maximum punch kind of to get through to the stereo bus without hitting too many compressors. So are you using compression on the stereo bus, or are you kind of leaving it wide open?
Oh yeah, I'm using compression on the stereo bus. Who's not using compression on their stereo bus?
I don't know, because some people aren't, because I don't know. I've people have been talking about Dolby Atmos and printing stems that kind of add up to the same thing, and it's very hard to do that with the stereo bus compressor. And I mean, I'm not thinking about that, but some people are.
Yeah. I mean, the SSL had a quad bus compressor on it. We were using stereo, we were using compressors across our mix,
yeah,
for a while. The thing is, the stuff that I get in, if it's coming from major stuff and major producers, the stuff that they have on their stereo bus, for you to recreate it, you're going to have to do a pseudo mastering on your stereo bus, if you're going to want to compete at these major stages. So, it's just something you have to learn how to do. I've learned how to preserve the integrity of the mix and the dynamics of the mix while still gaining some loudness. And sometimes things are just for monitoring purposes. We're going to remove any final loudness before it goes to mastering, but I still got to send it out there at levels that people think it's done, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So Isotope or Voice of God. No.
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 God,
no.
No. No, I'm not. I mean, you could use it for stuff. It's not for me. It's not my preferred way. I mean, I do have an SSL emulated compressor on there. It's actually from Native Instruments. It's their solid
comp
bus.
Or something.
Yeah, it's called their solid comp. They also have their solid bus compressor. Well, I use those on my buses, actually. So that's another form of routing. And it does give a cohesiveness, to the mix. Sometimes when you use some of the same gear, it's just thinking about, when you use a board, there's a cohesiveness, there's a sound to it.
It's the filter, it's the lens or whatever.
Right. It's very clean, but it kind of gives you that glue, especially their comp, without adding really any kind of coloration or anything like that. That's a huge part of my sound. I'm not going to lie. It's one of those that I can work without it. I've tried, Waves and Universal Audios, but there's such way that Native Instruments, and I've been using it before Plugin Alliance had it. This was an old, plugin. I think people are just now getting onto it because it's now available through Plugin Alliance.
Oh, nice. Oh,
yeah,
right, because they joined forces.
Correct. Them and another company.
I think Isotope, I think Isotope is now, no, I don't know. We're in the middle of the plugin conglomeratization. I don't know what the word is. I feel like all these plugin companies are starting to become conglomerates, right? There's going to be the Plugin Alliance one, and Slate got acquired by another one, and I don't even know what's going on.
Oh, see, I didn't even hear about the Slate one. I actually have that one It's just their like low and high like shape. Like I still have a beat, like a sonic maximizer BB in here. It's the idea of that. It's a final low and high and enhancer that just adds this like, sprinkles on
With
it.
the revival, yeah.
Yeah. I also, like, see, I use a clipper on like my stereo bus. Again, this is loudness. This stuff is removed for mastering or it's put to 0 because sometimes at some point it does become a part of the sound. So you have to be careful about like how much you use on your stereo bus.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it skillfully and it's started to become a part of your aesthetic, like this is aesthetic of my mixing now. This is a sound that like my clients know and that people listen to my mixes. They're like, oh, I love the way this sounds. Well, that's because of my, routing and fine tuning it over the years. Like I can kind of know my levels with the clipper change because I print less compressed passes from mastering. And there's times when you remove it and you're like, that just took away a part of the sound of the mix. And I have to maybe make an adjustment to where, okay, I'm not inhibiting the loudness of the mastering engineer, but I'm also not going to give them a hard time trying to recreate something that I just removed off.
Yeah. I just had that this week. I had a mix that I sent to get mastered and it was just like wasn't happening. And in the end, the mastering engineer used the limited version that I, had sent the client because I just had like the Pro L2 on it. But it was adding a glue that once it was removed, it just wasn't hitting the same way. And then the low end I was getting back was not the same low end that I wanted, right? So sometimes you got to just roll with it, right? Like it does. There is something to do to that glue that, I didn't smash it, right? So he still had some more extra space to kind of push it a little bit louder. But yeah, sometimes like whatever you're doing on the master bus, just stereo bus, just it does the glue that you need,
I think I used to get like requests more before about like, hey, we need this at, -6 and like, well, I also work with my mastering engineer. So hopefully if I can just send my stuff to him, what up, Johnny Horesco, then I would be fine. But like, I think maybe twice I got like specific like send backs of, no, you need to print it this way. I feel like a lot of modern mastering engineers, like they've been dealing with this loudness stuff for so long now that they've had to adapt.
Yeah.
I feel like everybody on every level has had to adapt. Like they're not the only ones dealing with it. We deal with it like as mixing engineers from what we receive from production now and from the recording side. So
yeah,
and everybody still wants to hear it louder. So we're kind of like working within it.
Yeah, from what I understand, like the top mixing engineers, like the Serbins or whatever, are sending like those -8 dB kind of mixes to their mastering engineers, and and then they get another dB or something.
Yeah,
it's crazy. Yeah, it's wild.
It is, but that goes to also show, like I say, like if you want to be competitive at those levels, like you got to push it. You got to be comfortable, like using that stereo processing, sometimes using multi-band processing, but if you want to match those levels. So
right, depends on the genre, I think, and the song, but yeah, for sure. And it's so like it sounds like for you that does matter. So you have like you have your chain or whatever that's getting you there, whether with between the native instruments, the solid comp and the clipper. What else is on your on your stereo bus? Like what else do you usually do?
I have a linear EQ on there, which is their low band. So a lot, again, just because mud, it builds up. So sometimes I sweep through that too. Again, their low band EQ, it gives you designated frequencies. And I'm doing maybe half a dB because, at this stage, half a dB is a lot, you're like, again, you're like doing pseudo mastering here. And I just sweep it. It's typically somewhere between, I feel like 211 is always the number, 211 hertz or 215. And the weird thing about this plugin is it doesn't always give you the same numbers. I haven't figured out why.
This is Native Instruments?
No, this is Waves. This is Waves. Linear EQ, the low band.
Okay.
Yeah. So I also do a high pass there if it's needed because, again, there's a lot of stuff that's taking up a lot of energy that we don't even hear. We don't hear it. We don't need it. Get rid of it. You're going to get more headroom in your mixes. You're going to be able to get more dynamics. Like you could push a little bit more. Your kick is going to come through. But again, every song is a little bit different. So I sweep through that and I will bypass it. Sometimes I'm like, okay, Daniela, you just cutting off frequencies just to do it or did it actually need it? So I will bypass it. But 9 times out of 10, it's on there. And then a small reduction in like the low bands. Like I said, I'll sweep through the 200s at whatever that plugin is, the linear EQ low band. It seems to settle on like 211 a lot. So 211 hertz seems to be where, I don't know if in my mix from other bus stuff that it builds up. And then I have the solid bus comp, and I typically keep that at a 4-to-1 ratio. I treat it like the traditional SSL bus compressor, which when here I learned at the studios, we would always use the 4-to-1 ratio.
Really?
And then we would use the slowest attack time and the fastest release time. And a lot of times we'd want to get the needle somewhere between that 2 and 3, and it's only flamming at that first 4 mark, like at the hottest part of the song. And I swear by that, that's where I feel comfortable in the glue. That's like my stereo mix glue for sure. That's what glues just the mix together. And then I do have a multiband. I have the linear MB multiband on there as well, just to, again, control. And I'll bypass that sometimes if it's like, okay, this is cleaning up too much and we're taking away the groove or feeling of the song. It typically is that. But, again, if this was booked to be a clean pop, song, then I'll typically have it on. And it does put put the mix in a box because I'm kind of stamping those frequency ranges with the multiband. So I may not be giving my mastering engineer as much leadway to make changes, but if the client was happy with the sound anyways, then really mastering was just going to be the final loudness and some polish, not necessarily changing the sonic tone of it anyways.
Yeah. Wow. So you have quite a lot going on. It's interesting to hear how different people do it, because I do some of the things that you're doing. I use a Pro Q3 in a similar way to the way you're talking about the linear EQ, and then I'll just kind of bypass it and see if it actually sounds better with it, with it off. And I'll do a lot of is this actually improving or is it worse? Because your ears can deceive you when you're making the EQ moves. So
for sure.
But yeah, it's there's so many ways to skin the cat. So it's interesting. I haven't even checked out the Clipper game. I haven't gotten into Clippers at all. I think it's probably time. I'm probably overdue to check it out. The standard clip, that's the one people use.
IK Multimedia has the Clipper. If that was one that even Phil used, I don't use that one. I actually use, it's just called Z Clip. I'll have to get the company. It was like an offering company. It was a free one. This has been with me since day one. This day one plugin mixing engineer. So I'll have to follow up with you and give you the name of that.
All right. Sounds great. I wanted to ask you, based on what you were talking about earlier, it sounds like you want your artists or the producers that you're working with to send you files that are basically wet, with all effects, how they had it, in their rough mix, or do you ask for things dry? Because it sounds like you want things kind of to be already on the way.
For producers that are doing their own production mixing, absolutely, because they're good producers, they're good engineers. It doesn't make any sense to receive it dry and then me try to recreate it. That's not what the job is. They've already gotten the sound that they want. They just now need it to be cleaned up and be presentable to the public. And so in that case, yes, but I need options and I need the accessibility. So for instance, wet stems, I don't necessarily want your reverb on the vocals. You can send me separated effects return stems. That way I have control to re-level. Because that's the biggest part, obviously, too, is having the right amount of control of what you need so that you can get to the desired results of the mix. However, I also deal with sessions that come in with Pro Tools, and sometimes you'll bypass their stuff or be like, yeah, this bus is not that great. We could, reroute this. But if the sound's already there, I'm not trying to go backwards. I want to work from where you left off. Basically.
Yeah. So you're often getting Pro Tools sessions and just taking them over the finish line.
It's right. It's a combination of stems and Pro Tools sessions. And a lot of times the stems, I will get wet and dry options. And I do use a combination of wet and dry. So I always value having, like I said, the accessibility and those options to have complete control.
So you ask for both if you can, basically.
Right. Correct.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think with vocals, for sure.
Especially for vocals, right?
Especially for vocals. Instruments, I'm not really, I don't want to cross fingers. Nobody I'm working with is ruining the instrumental mix. A lot of times it's the vocals that people have a problem with.
Right.
Producers typically, their stuff sounds fine. It just now needs to be mixed with the vocals correctly. So I can get instruments wet exactly how the producer wants it. Then vocals can be processed, and then an option that's dry.
Yeah, the vocals are, also as we mentioned earlier, vocals are the king and queen of the song. So you gotta make it work, and how you affect the vocal affects so much. So sometimes it's better to leave that for the mixing engineer versus, maybe the snare drum we could just leave whatever verb was put on there, sort of thing. Yeah. So there was another thing that you mentioned that was interesting, was talking about like bringing the vocals up to a better level before you even put it in the mix. What exactly did you mean? And maybe you could walk me through that.
Sure. Recording at home has become a popular thing as well. And so, I mean, not only I feel like my job has really become audio restoration because, like I said, I'm a better editor than I am a mixer, to be honest. Like, so cleaning up like any artifacts, bad like room recordings through like denoising. But then, a lot of these recordings too, they're just very thin. There's like, it's a cheap microphone with a cheap interface in a homeroom. That's not for everybody. I do have like, there's a tier of what I'm working on. There's like I don't try not to work with day one anymore, but still you take those projects. And then there's people that have been doing this for a long time and that have a good quality sound. Those people I'm typically working with stems. In between is kind of in between. And then day one, it's like, oh man, before I even work on this, I'm going to revamp the vocals, basically, run it through a compressor, run it through a preamp, because it never got ran through anything initially. It's just
so
was cheap.
You'll put it through analog gear, basically.
Correct.
Oh,
Fatten
nice.
it up, thicken it up, because I don't want to always use the plugins, because I'm going to use those plugins when I mix. So I don't want to use those plugins on trying to get the source material up to par. Like, let's rerun this like as if we were in a studio and give it that saturation and that processing. And now I can work with it, with the plugins I'm going to use in the box.
Nice. Do you use like Soothe or anything like that before you do that enhancement, or you only worry about it if it sounds really bad?
Only if it sounds really bad. Obviously, I'm going to strip away. I'm new to Soothe, so it's not like heavily in my arsenal just as yet, but similar processing, yes. Like we would clean it up. Obviously, before, it doesn't make any sense to make something louder and fatter that sounds bad and then, try to remove it.
Yeah. I interviewed someone named Nina, who's a mixing engineer in Amsterdam, and she was saying,
"Oh, yes, we're friends online."
Awesome! Yeah,
community. Yeah,
she's great. And she was telling me like the same thing. Like she'll go to like one of these like online websites where you can kind of like send audio through vintage gear or whatever. And so if she gets like this like Focusrite kind of sound, she'll like clean it up and then send it through that stuff so that it no longer sounds anemic after like putting on Soothe or whatever. And then all of it sudden has like all the life of the transformers and the analog gear and stuff. I was like, oh, that's like a really neat way to kind of put life into like. So it sounds like you're doing something very, very similar, which is dope.
It's the exact same. Yeah, you have to like. It's kind of making up, like I said, for them not having good gear. Yeah, there's a lot, like I said, more than just the room problems. I had a client the other day. I was like, hey, we can't use these vocals. Like, you've got to re-record them. And I advised him to get the chaotic eyeball, because I was like, what are you recording through? And he actually had really good gear. He had analog gear. He had a 500 like lunchbox. Yeah, so he liked great gear, but it's just the room was horrible. And I could hear the ringing and just, again, collectively, everything adding up. Yeah. And then when you strip it, it just creates this weird resonant ring. It doesn't make sense. So I was like, you've got to re-record it. But, he bought the chaotic eyeball, re-recorded the vocals, and it's so much better, like it made a huge difference and impact. So, but sometimes it's, maybe they've done something with the room to make it sound better. But then, like I said, it's a cheap mic or interface, and emulation and plug-in emulation, saturation, and routing can only do so much. So I really, like, Nina must have been onto it. It's like there's something about running it through some gear first and getting those levels up that really makes a huge difference. Then once you bring it in the box to work on it and mix.
Got it. Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we gotta treat the Focusrite sound somehow. So let's do it. Amazing. I wanted to ask you about a couple of the projects you worked on. There was a track that I found on one of your playlists called Adonai. I'm pronouncing it right? That was just Adonai. Super crazy production. I don't know, like it's the most like modern kind of version of a doo-wop kind of thing. Tell me a little bit about that project and what you did there, because that was wild. I know this isn't the Sauce segment, but I'm just curious about it.
No, it's all good. Funny, speaking of noise reduction, I'm also pulling them up. I had to do noise reduction on their vocals. I'm not sure which song you're talking about, but one of those booked, or two of those booked. They're like,
Keep the Voices Inside, I think was the one.
Keep the Voices Inside. Very nice. That's a good one. That one actually came in pretty good. So they're a group that do send me stems, and then a lot of times I'll get a couple options. But it's never like, always straightforward. Sometimes they'll like, oh, we're going to do this to the bass or send this with the drums. Or it might be like, hey, can you do noise reduction on the vocals? Because a lot of times they're also recording at home too. But Nick, who's on that project, does an amazing work. So production-wise, like that, all credit goes to Ad and I and Nick, like, and their feature singers, like vibes and the production and the creativity, like that is all them. When I get it, and I agree with you, as a listener, I'm compelled to their music. And, sometimes when you do this all the time, you want to enjoy the things that you work on, like as a consumer too, not just like always having it under the microscope and trying to, fix things. Yeah, and it was a project like that. So it was super special to me as well. And when I got their music, I'm like, I just want to preserve it. Like, I don't want to mess it up. I just want to like preserve the coolness of it and just make it a little bit more translatable, to the public, because it's a little rough around the edges, but it's supposed to be too. I think it's supposed to have that. So
I'm like so curious about the vocal sound. Like, I don't know how it sounds like maybe it was baked in, but like then great job preserving it, because it's like, what a cool way to kind of recreate that kind of lo-fi Motown kind of sound on a vocal. Like, I don't even know what's going on there. It's like form shifting. I have no idea.
Yeah, they're definitely doing a lot with the form shifting for sure. For me, it was more about preserving it and not cleaning it up too much, but cleaning it up enough so it can sit through the mix, and sit on top of the mix, but not, again, lose that lo-fi, which, even lo-fi is coming in on other stuff too as well. It's starting to be in R&B. So a little bit in pop too. So got a little practice already with Ad and I.
Yeah, people got to check that out. That sounded really, really cool. I was like, whoa, what is this? It was just totally out of left field, and I dug it. So congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great job on it.
They're very specific, about their sound too. I've mixed a couple other things for them, but sometimes they'll try another mixer. Sometimes I'm not, the right mixer for a particular song. And they also sent the tracks off to 2 different mastering engineers too. So they will take the time to try out different sounds in the final product, which I also appreciate, their exploration of even the mixing and mastering.
Amazing. Let's talk about monitoring. How are you listening? What's your listening environment like? What speakers, headphones? What's your jam?
What's my jam? Not much. No, I'm in the room where I do all of my independent mixing, and if it's anything that's major, then I'll have to book out a room, and that typically will come obviously with a budget. So in house, we are just with the BX5s. I've had these M Audio since 2000. Okay, well, I got the originals ones in 2007. Then one of them broke 2 years after I started mixing. So I tried to replace them, but they're newer models. They didn't sound the same. They changed something. These have carbon filter, and they changed the wood. You know how it is when speakers change anything. They just don't sound the same.
Right. Yes.
So I went on a search. Phil actually had some he let me borrow. Those didn't sound good. I was like, those are ugly. They're weird and boxy. So I found these BX5s. I think the ones I had before were the BX5As. But they were the closest. They only did a year or two of production, then they switched to the new one. So I had even gotten them. They were not sold out, but they were no longer making them. But I was able to find them, and they were the closest to the sound. So that's what I've had. They're nothing substantial, but they're just what I've been using, for pretty much a decade or over a decade.
So you're just super familiar with them.
It's just super familiar with them. And as you know, it's not necessary having the best tools. That always helps, but it's knowing how your tools translate. That's more important. So there's some treatment in the room, just basic, studio treatment that's been done. And then I know these speakers. So they do fine for any independent projects and the stuff that I've been doing that are more these are Spotify artists. They're doing well, but they're typically that's where it's going. Anything that's a major I have a budget, then I'm in studio over at either Supersound, or I really like to book Parhelion as well. And so there we're looking at Focals or Barefoots and in-house or Asperger's. I've never really been a fan for that because, again, who's mixing on Asperger's? That's all the feel and the vibe.
Yeah, that's I think what's his name? Urko. Urko's mixing on the Asperger's.
Oh, is he mixing hip hop or what's he mixing?
Hip hop.
Okay.
Absolutely hip hop. Yeah.
No, they're great for in session, but I rarely, even if I'm there, I'm not like switching back and forth between those. Maybe at the end, you're like, oh yeah, let me check how it feels, But I'm a big fan of the focals, so I am looking at the focal shapes, 6.5s. I do like smaller monitors. I mix at low levels. I'm not, I don't need a lot. I don't also use a sub. I get nervous with subs. I know some mixers that do like to mix with subs. For me, I'm like, the control of what I can hear at it, I have a good sense of where the bass is at. The rest of some of this stuff I let mastering deal with. I trust them,
Yeah, totally. That's what they're there for. Yeah,
Right.
I'm using focal shaped twins actually. So
very nice.
I love them. They're great.
Awesome.
They translate so well, and just like from like 40 hertz to like I don't know the top, just super balanced, and very 3D also. Like you can really. I'm enjoying them. So
we had the focals. Like I've worked on them as well, like in studio. And then NS10s. I don't know how many people are still using them, but if they're in the studio, I will reference them because they're something as an engineer. If you've ever like been in studios, the NS10s. So I mean, they're not like I'm not going out looking for them to go mix on, but I will definitely A/B while mixing with NS10s and use them. If I'm in a studio.
Yeah, I just interviewed a mastering engineer named Dave McNair, and he told me if someone mixes on NS10s, I can tell like immediately because of exactly
your
where
mix sounds exactly like an NS10. Like
not that it's a bad thing, but it's just it's like obvious for him at least. I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's what it is.
Yeah, no, I get. I don't know that side of it, but I know like when I mix on NS10s. The way that it sounds, like when I go listen to it, I'm like, man, this sounds like what it's like. It sounds like the NS10s. There's something about, I don't know, maybe the way you make the decisions on them, but
yeah, they seem to work for people, and they've been working since the 80s. So rock and roll. I wanted to ask you about like speed in the studio. Do you have any tricks to anything you do to kind of speed things up? Like, are you hip to sound flow? I don't know, key commands, anything in particular that kind of helps you speed up your workflow?
Oh yeah, key commands for sure. You got to be working with key commands if you want to move faster. I do not have the Stream Deck, but that is something I feel like I'm behind on, which I need to get going because there's some things that I'm like, okay, they've created stuff that this could be automated or, I did start taking advantage of like the track presets, which did help. Like a lot of things that I do in sessions all the time, like declick or again, denoise, like let's just make those track presets or simple shaping that I tend to do. I'll make anything like those track presets. And obviously I use templates. That's probably the biggest, tip. Get a template that and you're comfortable with, your routing, how it's set up. So you know exactly what to do, where to do it at, instead of like lily-dallying around over here and over here, because that could waste time as well too. I also set a timer for myself because I can sometimes get lost in the editing and lost in the mixing and trying certain things. So a lot of times I'll set a timer for like 40 minutes because 40 minutes is enough to get going on something, but not get stuck and focused on it, It's like the Pomodoro effect. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I've heard of it.
I think they do like 25 minutes though. Like it's a 25-minute and then a 5-minute break and 25 and 5. But I think they also have different ranges in 40. I like the 40 and then do a 10-minute break. And you do that like 3 times. And then the 4th time you take a longer extended break. So if you need to get something done and you want to stay focused and just stay on task, that's a good way.
Yeah, 40 minutes I feel like is like a much better time frame than 25 minutes if you're mixing because you got to get into a flow state, right?
For sure. 25, you're probably just getting like going. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
But if you need to do passes or something like that, like cleanup, sometimes 25 can be good. Where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do one, pass and take care of all finished cleanups, That way you do limit yourself too. Sometimes limiting yourself is a good thing.
Again, no, totally. Yeah, I feel like we people that do what we do, we tend to get like way too deep into the weeds and we can get totally lost. And so like having like a time frame is totally a great way to kind of like stay focused and on task. I just as like a dad, just because I have kids and like my time is so much more limited, it's forced me to like just do things faster because like sometimes like, I'll have like a kid that's homesick or whatever and they're napping. So I have like an hour to maybe like do something. It's like, okay, what can we do in an hour? And that kind of just like taught me to like, oh, I could just do this really quickly if I focus and I don't get lost in the weeds. Does it? How quickly are you able to mix? Like, how long does a typical mix take you?
I mean, it just depends. Like, again, how are the files coming in? Is this just a stem mix? I mean, I've mixed something that has sounded fantastic in 2 hours before. Like, that is not the norm. Let me just clarify that. That is far from the norm, but it has happened before. Like when you're just like, okay, I'm going to focus. I'm going to do exactly what it needs to be done. I'm not going to spend time trying things. And if it's the same style, could be the same client, it's a template. Template is about 80% of the work for me and my sound, because it's been fine-tuned. Then it may not take that much longer for the rest. But typically, I think I try to put myself, once everything is like set up in the session, I try to give like a 4-hour limit of like, let's see, 4 hours where we can get this to. And it should be close. In reality, I'd probably spend about 6 hours because I do take breaks and I do want to listen to it. And I might want to try something. So I think 6 hours is a good sweet spot. There are times where I might need to revisit it the next day. So I wouldn't say it's like 2 hours. 2 days, but that might take 8 to 10 hours. That has been broken up into 2 days, if that makes sense. That's something a little bit more heavy-handed, requires some more work, or if I've been given more freedom to create and I want to try some things.
Yeah, there's different kinds of mixes, right? There's the mix where you just kind of do it and you pump it out, and then there's times where you just need also like some objectivity, right? Like a break away from mixing also sometimes is really good to kind of like not just maybe more than 10 minutes. For me, it's like a day. It's like the next day maybe I'll come in and I'll be like, oh, I really messed this up. So it's good to get like those breaks, kind of like you're talking about. I love it.
Going outside is really good. It will just refresh your ears. I have dogs, so I've got to get out and take them anyways. And so that's like a perfect way to kind of reset your ears and even just the pressure, just like the atmosphere you're in. And then when you come back, you can kind of listen to it with a fresh set of ears.
Amazing. Well, I think this is a perfect segue to head over to the Sauce segment. You sent me a track called Where You Are by Jonathan Singletary featuring Reggie McBride. So let's have a listen to that for about 90 seconds. We'll talk about what went into it, and I guess we'll get even deeper into your process. Sound cool?
Great.
Wish I could show you everything, give you the world in golden green, just you and me, you and me. We're better together, so it seems. Can we get old and blow this scene, just you and me, you and me. Better or worse, I'm on your team. Can we get ghosts inside these dreams? Just you and me, you and me. We're trying hard to make this work. This is real love, even when it hurts. Yeah. 'Cause even if the sky is falling, I'd rather be where you are. Blue. You'll be amazed what luck can do. It's me and you, me and you. These clouds can change our point of view, but every day find strength in you. It's me and you, me and you. Trying hard to make this work, but this is real love, even when it.
Yeah, Daniela, this is a really cool track. I don't even know what genre it is. You know what I mean? It's got like a bit of like that Jack Johnson kind of vibe. I don't know if you're into Jack Johnson, but with like a totally different kind of vocalist. And like, it's a bit more like, I don't know. There's like some R&B elements in there also. And I love the bass. It's kind of like it's a mix,
Yeah.
I don't know. Very cool track.
Thank you so much. It's a very, special track. The artist, a big fan of as well. And we're also working on a track now. So hopefully we'll have something new for you guys to listen to. But I would still put it in R&B for me. It's a little soul R&B, little touch of pop on the mix, but I didn't go too pop crazy on it. And the bass player, is it Reggie McBride on there? he had played bass for Stevie Wonder. He's been around. He's played bass for some like prolific names in the industry. And so, anytime somebody sends you a track and it has a feature on it, you kind of like, okay, well, who's this feature? And especially when I didn't hear any vocals, I was like, oh, the feature is the bass player. And so I did some research on him and I was like, oh my God, this is like, this is legacy. These are legacy musicians. And so that already gave me the objective. Again, I'm all about preserving this now. This is all about the bass. This is all about preserving your performance and making sure. Yeah, all about the bass. So it just was something unique and special. And Jonathan I had worked with before. He came from Morehouse, and I did some stuff. That's where the Emmy nomination came from, was mixing with them. And so just a really cool project to be a part of. And again, like I believe in the singer and I was honored.
Great voice. I really like the quality of his
amazing
voice.
Yeah. It's a good tone. It's a pleasurable listen. You're like, oh, I could listen to these vocals. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like soft and sultry, but also cool. It's like a cool mix.
Yeah, I think he's gonna do well. And that song actually, we got radio placement on that one too, so it did really well. I think it streamed like 500,000, so not too bad for an early release for him too. I think that was maybe his third song, I think. So
wow. So what do you know about what went into that bass part that was recorded by Reggie McBride?
Oh, I don't know much on that or the story of how he got it.
Very buttery, very kind of like I don't know, it was a vibey tone, I'm assuming it was like a flat wound kind of bass.
It's very I don't want to say bubbly, but like wide. I don't know how to explain that. Like it's like very prominent and like a wide bubble.
It's got like a nice, a pleasant mid range. Do you remember what you did to the bass on that track?
Probably the same thing I do all the basses on the track, maybe except a little bit less. Now I probably backed off of the compressor on that one since I do use the Native Instruments solid bus compressor with that one, and I try to normally on my other basses it might be hitting at the 6 dB of like gain reduction, but I know sometimes when I do that I'm like, am I doing too much? So I may have backed off like my threshold on this one because I can hear. I went back and listened to this too, and I'm like, okay, yeah, that bass is, and it should have. It was supposed to take precedence in the mix, but it was a lot more in front than normal.
Yeah. It was definitely in front of the kick. But I like the way you blended also with the kick. The kick was like you could totally hear it, but it wasn't like overpowering it in any sort of way. It was a good blend.
Yeah. Well, I got good direction too. I think good source material, good artists, good producers. Good mixer gives you a good product. So
epic. Anything else you remember on a technical level from that mix?
Yeah, that one also had noise reduction. So this one for me was tricky because again, it was recorded in a room. The bass wasn't necessarily the cleanest either. So it was like, how do I preserve this and keep this like soulful aesthetic? But I got to clean it up. But I needed to kind of keep it a little raspy. or else you're going to take the soul out. But
yeah, you want the grit.
Yeah, you want it. You want that grit. And
totally.
But I don't want to hear this room that it's been recorded in. You know what I'm saying? Like I will like OCD over that. So that did require some noise reduction. I think it's just like tastefully done. Again, just doing things in a step-orientated way, little by little, so that we're kind of removing the unpleasant things, not in a really big mass sweep to where you could hear it.
It's like isotope spectral denoise kind of thing.
Probably a combination of that. I do multiple combinations, like a little bit of X noise, a little bit of isotope denoise, a little bit of coverage with EQ. So that's what I mean by stepping. Like I'm doing very minute things with multiple plugins and down the process. So it makes a big difference without like completely just stripping everything away. If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, because if if there's like a resonance at like 700 hertz in the room or something, you could just dip that out even before you hit the spectral denoise so that it's not as much of an issue anyways, and like get a cleaner sound to begin with, that kind of thing. I'm assuming that's what you're trying to say.
Somewhat. And then making up with EQ, it's on the X noise, you can actually set the like high frequency to where it's not as like the threshold is at a different level, and that makes a big difference too. Because how like when you denoise, it's like all the top end is gone. It seems like so. There's just ways like to utilize different tools. I think.
Yeah. That's smart. That's
and
great.
some of them do really well at different frequency ranges too. That's what I'm saying. Like using different ones for different noises. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. Like when I'm editing podcasts, I'll often like do like steps of denoising also. Or I'll do like you said, like EQing. I'll get rid of rumble before I hit like an RX like spectral denoiser or something, and then sometimes I'll also use the voice denoise and like or different amounts. Or if I'm doing de-reverb, even then how much do you use of that? Maybe only a few dB before it starts to sound like super artifacty or whatever. And so you kind of just like slowly piece it together. I don't know. That's something that I do. I don't know. That sounds like similar-ish. Similar-ish to what you're doing. Epic. Wait, but what did you do to the vocal in terms of like compression? It's not like it sounds really good. Like it's like in the end there's like so much personality that coming through in the voice.
Good. Well, I think that's also just Jonathan. So let me not take too much credit for his own vocals.
You can take a little bit of credit.
Yeah, we take a little bit of credit. Yeah, that one was also still noise reduction on that one too, I remember. And a little bit of EQ. Also, like, it would have been the same routing, but like, even though I have the same templates, every vocal gets its own treatment. You know what I'm saying? Like, the EQ and the amount of compression is always set, for each one. The TDR Kotelnikov, which I did a little video on my Instagram, like, that's my vocal compressor, and it's my all vocal glue. And it's a big part of the sound there. And so is also the Native Instruments solid comp, which I actually use on the background vocal buses. So if there were backgrounds there, that would have been a big part of that sound. I do use the RVox on the lead vocal. I mean, it's levels. It's a level thing. It just gets levels up and gets it to sit. And it would have been running through the same then, like all vocal bus, which I kind of already have broke down. It does have like a stereo widening on it a little bit, like of a high pass filter. And then the C4 multiband compressor, which again, that's a lot of the sound of the vocal too, So I play with those high mids and highs for each vocal.
I think that's the compression that I'm hearing is like the C4, because I'm hearing like the crispiness in the mid range.
It's a C4 then, probably. Yeah.
Maybe I don't know. Based on what you're describing, I have no idea. We'd have to like play back the session and bypass and unbypass it to know.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. Like, there is a lot of routing. Some people are against groups. Some people are buses. I'm a bus girl. I love groups. I love my food groups, but to me, they're tastefully done. And so sometimes there's so many things that it's going through that it's the collective of the sound. So it's hard to say like what exactly it was, but I know what you mean. There is like that C4 factor in there for that crispiness of it. Some of that glue, I know that glue's coming from this particular, compressor, but it's all working together.
Right. You said your template's like 80% almost of like what the sound is. So it sounds like you've just like dialed it in over the years to get to like pretty close to where you want to be.
I have. And then as an engineer, you're like, I'm bored. I want to grow. And so you start exploring new options, which is kind of like where I'm at. So that's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, but it's so tried and true. It's so hard to change when your stuff works, Yeah. Because you've got to now go down this other path and start fine tuning that, plugin or routing or processing that you're doing. But I think it's worth it. Got to grow, as an engineer.
Sometimes I guess it's about like finding time to explore that, not necessarily when it's on the line. You know what I mean? Like you're happy with the mix now. Let's see if you could do something interesting. With some extra spare time, or just mess around with some things, or take some time to do that. There's like there's like go time, and then there's like learning time. But one thing that I've definitely, I just feel like everybody I've interviewed is like a lifetime learner, and everybody just like slowly wants to get better at their craft, and people don't stay stagnant for very long. It seems that everybody's just constantly on a quest to improve themselves and make better music. So it sounds like you're on that path as well.
I think that's what it's about. Yeah,
totally.
It's a craft, So it's a lifetime journey. I'm not saying like it took a lifetime to be a good engineer. I'm already a good engineer, but like the depths of how I engineer and what I explore, like that's it's a craft, and also our industry is changing, so we are continuing to have to stay up to date and change and adapt. Exactly.
Right. We'll see what happens with this whole Atmos thing. To be determined.
Are you on Atmos?
Oh, not at all. No. I haven't heard an Atmos room. I've heard binaural things, but until I hear it in the flesh, the verdict is not in yet. So we'll see.
Okay. I have heard an Atmos room. I get it. I get it in the room, and I get also the community being like, well, who's going to listen to this? How are the consumers going to listen to Atmos? And, the industry already went through the same thing with surround.
Right. I was talking to my dad about this. He was like, yeah, because there was this article in the New York Times about Atmos, and like my dad sent me it, and my uncle was like, what is this? What's happening? And I'm like, okay, so I was like, my dad basically said like in the 70s there was like quadraphonic, and and like he had a friend that was like an audiophile, or his dad was an audiophile, and they got it, and then like nothing ever happened with it. Like it's been like there have been these surround things for like forever, right? And like we'll see if this is the one that actually catches on. But my dad was also saying that like when they went from mono to stereo, it was like just a few years, really. Like there was like a very short window where like they'd have these stereo CD, vinyls, and they would say it's also mono compatible. I think that shift was already faster than what we're seeing with Dolby Atmos, from what I'm understanding, which is interesting. So, but yeah, as you were saying, in the room, you get it.
Yeah, in the room, it sounds,
in the headphones.
It's amazing. It's very powerful. It's like, okay, I get it for theater, for movies, for, like an experience that if an artist wanted to put on. And I get it for just like consumer fun for right now. But I mean, I don't think it's going to be long. I think with Apple releasing their visors and things getting real on that sense, like virtual reality, like, dude, Atmos is going to be there. It's going to be super cool. Like when you're putting a set on and Atmos is there. So maybe like thinking gaming, the music world, I think once everybody, when they're logging on Instagram through their visors, we're probably going to be like an Atmos world, right?
Maybe.
So meta, like, is what I'm saying. I see it like that's where like the big takeoff is. I feel like.
Yeah. I'm skeptical of that stuff also, to be honest. Like, just because, like, I don't want to live in a world where I'm just like in VR all day. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Like, I'm already sick of having a phone in my pocket all day.
Right.
Like
I feel like it'll be those big splits, like where the Amish went, and it'll be this big split of the communities. Yeah. Like we're no longer going with the AI and the virtual reality.
Yeah,
like,
Luddites. Yeah, let's do it.
We're only electronic.
Yeah, there's gonna be like the cyborgs and the analog humans, or something. Like who knows, man? I don't know. This is
interesting times for sure.
It's definitely interesting times. Yeah. Did you ever see the show Upload? Have you seen Upload?
Oh yes, I have. It was great. I saw the first season. The first season was great.
Yes, I had like an existential crisis after the first episode because it was like, shit, this is the future, and like, do we want this? Is this good? I don't know. It was just close enough that it felt really creepy, kind of like Don't Look Up, which is like so close to reality but not reality that it's just like a notch away that you're just creeped out by it. I don't know. That's how I felt.
I can understand that. I mean, it's all, I don't know. Technology is going to be changing a lot, and the faster it gets, the faster it's going to be changing. So,
right, brace yourself.
Yeah,
we'll see. But for now, you're not worried about Atmos in terms of like mixing and.
I didn't say I wasn't worried about it. I mean, I think there's cause, to take it serious for sure. Like I said, I just think it opens up more opportunities. Like I said, if you wanted to go into gaming and I'd already learned surround. So like I'm familiar with surround sound mixing. So Atmos now we're just adding in height. So I'm not like too like scared, like, oh my God, it's so much, new stuff to learn. Right now it's just about time. Like bookings are, in stereo right now, and we still need plenty of stereo mixers. So it's really just like not having time. However, there are other engineers who are being able to kind of break into the game because they're ready for Atmos because,
right.
They're already mixing in Atmos. And so it gives them an opportunity.
Yeah.
We'll see what the music industry decides. There's a lot of people for it. There's a lot of people against it. So,
right.
Only time will tell.
I wouldn't say I'm for or against, but I'm skeptical. Like until I experience it.
Skeptical.
Until I experience it for real, like in a real room. Like, I've seen movies with Atmos, right? Like I've been in movie theaters, but I haven't heard the Elton John Rocket Man in a Atmos room like people talk about. So until that happens,
I'm interested to explore recording, and in Atmos, I saw a 360 recorder that looked really, really cool, and it was a field recorder, and the possibilities of it. The way my mind thinks of it is not looking at it as like this commercial mixing. I'm looking at it as like real world scenarios of how we can really recreate the world, you know what I'm saying, from a sonic place. And in that sense, I think it's really cool and can be explored in so many ways. I think when you put it in the box of just like, Future's new song. Like, who's listening to that in Atmos? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's some stuff that it's like, this doesn't need to be in Atmos. Like, what are we really breaking away into this 3-dimensional space? But when you put it into a different category of like, well, let's produce in Atmos and actually record from the get, then I think it opens up a whole different world.
Yes, that totally. I've spoken to other people who have said similar things, and I totally resonate with that. Well, Daniela, we've talked about so many things. I think it's time to get towards the close. I want to ask you a couple general questions that I ask everybody on the show. We all have days where we're super pumped to get in the studio, do our things, but there's obviously days where we're less hyped about it. Do you have any habits, routines, anything you do that kind of helps you shift your mood, get into that right zone that you need to be in to do your work?
Yes. I like to listen to, it's the YouTube Law of Attraction, and it's just a whole bunch of motivational speeches. They're just so like what you need in the middle of a game day to like ignite your soul and just be like, you're right, I can do this, you know, kind of get into an athletic mode type of sense, because some days it does take that. And so sometimes just putting that on is just what I need to just change my mind frame. And, you know, so much is about your mindset too. So just stopping for a second, breathing, and turning down whatever the negative thing is, you know, that's like trying to stop me from working or just influencing my day, and turning up the positivity is really the only kind of way. Like for me, I literally have to shift my mindset. And that's, like I said, through like listening through motivational speeches. Sometimes I might need to take a walk and listen to it, or an uplifting podcast or something like that. But it's just a shift. You have to just shift that mindset, however it is for you. And then it's really like, I mean, Nike kind of said it best, just do it. Sometimes like, I'm like, just get in the room and start. Just get in the room and start, because once you start, you know, it's like things start getting edited, things start getting mixed. And the next thing you know, the mix is done and ready to be sent to the client, or the revision is done. So sometimes it's just getting in the room to start.
Right. Once you've done those first 5 minutes, you're in the zone and you're bound to finish it.
Right.
Amazing. And before I ask you the final question of the show, I wanted to touch on the Recording Academy. Congrats on getting nominated or elected. I'm not sure how it works. Tell us a little bit about what that's like, because I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I feel, you know, very honored to represent, you know, as an audio engineer. You know, this is my second term. I was first nominated in 2021, which was still during the pandemic. So it really wasn't until like 2022 that I was like in the position, like actually at events, in the role. And it was a lot of like advocacy. So like district advocacy, where we meet with our lawmakers and talk to them about what's going on in the industry. We tell our side of the story, you know, like who we are, what we're doing, you know, how this is our career, so that they can support bills, you know, that are going to be in benefit of us. It's also, you know, just about service, really. We're out in the community. I work with a lot of like nonprofits. That's something separate from the Academy, but the Academy has so much service that like you kind of get the bug, you know, once you're in the Academy and you see like how much people are doing for the community, you like find ways to be involved, you know, outside as well. And then, like I said, just representing. So I'm also like Grammy U, which is, you know, for students, since I'm an educator, like informing them about, hey, are you within Grammy U? That's a great way to go ahead and start networking and getting affiliated with the community. And then regular members, you know, as they have questions throughout, like, hey, how do I do this? How do I vote? What's this? Or, you know, when's the deadline for that? You know, just hoping to kind of facilitate either getting them the answer or getting them to who can get them the answer. So really just service. It's a lot of service, representing, and then advocacy.
And so that's like getting people to vote for the Grammys and be involved in like all those things.
Right. Well, there's like the Grammy U, which is just the educational, like for students that are enrolled in the program. There's the professional tier, which are like people like at labels, entertainment lawyers, distributors, tour managers. Like, so you're working in the music industry, but like you're not credited on like an album or something like that. And then there's the voting members, which these are individuals like in their craft, like producers, the artist, a singer, songwriter, engineer. Those are the members that actually get to vote. So yes, like speaking with new and up and coming engineers who may not know that they're eligible to vote and haven't applied. So,
right.
Which is we have to do every so often because, you know, we have new people coming in the game. I was somebody who I didn't even know I had Grammy, you know, participations or certificates until 2019 when I became a member. And so
Wow.
Just sometimes, yeah. So sometimes what you don't know is just like what you don't know. And a lot of people were like that. There's people that have been on Grammy-nominated projects didn't even know because they just didn't know their either involvement or that they were qualified, like I said. So just kind of speaking, who are those new members, speaking to them, getting them to be involved and active in the community as well.
Amazing. Well, congrats on that, and keep up the good work. And not just the music, but also the community building and all the things you're doing. So that just leads us to our final question of the show, which I've asked everybody who comes on the show. So just looking back on your journey, was there something you'd want to tell your earlier self or somebody who's just getting started? Piece of advice of like, hey, keep at that. It's going to get you where you want to go. Or maybe it's the other way around. Like, don't do that. It's holding you back. What would be that one thing you'd want to impart?
It'd be the first one. Yeah, keep at it. It'd probably be don't be afraid to show off. It took me a long time to adapt into like stepping in the forefront as an engineer or taking that ownership of who I was. So I think that's what it would be. Like don't be shy. Don't be afraid to show off in the studio. You've got it. Go for it. So just encouragement, really. Affirming encouragement to my younger self.
Yeah, because it's so when you're getting started, it seems so daunting and it's hard to think, can I really make it? And I remember, like, speaking of community, like my first experience like meeting other people was like at an AES. I went to an AES. I was like, oh, they're totally fine. I could keep doing this. Like I was like so in my own man cave that I had no idea it was possible. You know what I mean? And then you see other people and they're doing it and they're kind of like you, and it's like, oh, this is cool. So yeah, keep at it. You don't have to do it alone. Also, Amazing. Well, Daniela, it's so great to speak with you. You're doing great work. Thank you for taking the time to share your story and all the stuff that you're doing on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on here.
Hey everyone, here's a little addendum to the episode that Daniela sent me after we recorded our episode, and I think it sheds a little bit more light on the sauce segment and on some of the plugins she's using. So have a listen.
Hey, Ben. So I just wanted to give you an update on Jonathan Singletary's Where You Are, as I got the backstory. So with Reggie McBride, Jonathan Singletary's wife's makeup artist, who's a celebrity makeup artist, kept encouraging Jonathan to get on a record with her uncle. And once he moved out to LA, he eventually, reached out and then found out that her uncle was Reggie McBride. And after doing his own, research and finding out that he's this legendary bass player for the likes of Stevie Wonder and Tina Turner, Elton John, and so many others, he was like, oh yeah, I've got to, work with this, legendary bass player. And so this was still during the pandemic, and they did this remotely, and he sent Jonathan 2 takes, and Jonathan explained that the tone, the selection, the choices were all on groove and, fit right. So he didn't really have to do much on his end. And then, for me, I did use the wet stems from their session. But again, there was a lot of, cleanup that needed to be done just because of the way it was recorded, just like, almost anything else during the pandemic recorded at home. So that's why there was, so many mentions of noise reduction. But I do think, the mix comes across authentic and feels like it still has that good soul feel, like they were playing together in the same room, which, even the drums, like the whole feel of that is more like stomps and claps, like a room vibe of people jamming in the room. And so I think that was a good compliment on the mix. And I did check out the bass. And so I follow my traditional bass setup, which is a little bit of a high-pass filter. Well, not all the time, but on this one, I did do a high-pass filter. And then finding a complementary frequency to notch out to make room for the kick. This one happened to be a little bit higher at 152 hertz. But again, I think because it was more the stomp kind of clap feel than, kick and snare. It was just a different frequency range. And then I did, as expected, backed off my compressor. And so instead of doing about 6 dB of gain reduction, I was only at around 3 dB of gain reduction. And it was using the Solid Dynamics bus compressor. And there was something different that I did on this record. Well, it's not in my template to have it's the Pultec style EQ from Waves. And I do use it from time to time, but it's just not like set in my template. That's like, oh, I need to pull something out for a little extra oomph. And I followed a traditional bass trick, which is like to boost the lows and to attenuate. I did that at 60 hertz. And then I also did the same thing, but I did it at 3K. And I also boosted and attenuated, which I also followed up with what I normally would cut off, do like a low pass cut, which I explained, and try to find like a good resonating bump so that we can get something on the upper harmonics. And so this one, it kind of got done by the Pultec EQ, but then additionally, I did have a low shelf cutting at around 4.5K, but the Q was sharp so that it was resonating a bump there as well. So that is what I use on the bass. And also use the NSL channel, which I comment about a 50% of the time will use their like summing, NSL summing matrix channels throughout the different subgroups that I make. And on this record I did, and I had the bass one set to the Nevo with a little bit of drive, again, just for a little bit more saturation, as the bass was the main character for that song. And one final update, the clip that I was telling you about, it's actually called Clip Shifter, and that's by LVC Audio. And it's a free plugin, so I definitely would recommend it to try out as a way to get used to adding clipping into your processing. You know, clip has a different feel and a different sound than limiting does. So you might enjoy this style of processing on something like your stereo bus.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Secret Sonics. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you've been digging the show, it would be awesome if you could share this episode or your favorite episode with a friend or two, and or leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher of choice. That's it for now. Have a great week. Take care and dig in. See you soon. Bye-bye.